Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Henry Gilroy, co-executive producer of Star Wars Rebels. You're listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Welcome to Aggressive Negotiations. We're here at 201. That's right, past 200, and we're so excited to be back. And with me, as he is every single week, the Jedi Master who's ready for Vienna.
Vienna waits for Qui-Gon. I think we need to do that. A Weird Al Yankovic type of song, blending Billy Joel and Qui-Gon Jinn, two wonderful things put together. Finally, how you doing, Matt? I'm happy to be here. 201. I like it. It's weird. We're on the opposite side of 200. How crazy is that?
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
No, doing well. It's kind of losing my voice, so I apologize to everyone tonight that I don't have my normally annoying voice. So, I mean, people could like this better. Who knows?
I would like to apologize to everyone for not losing my voice. Sorry, everyone.
But, what's funny about this, John, is as we're recording this, we are on the eve of the Clone Wars returning, which is really cool. I know we are both kind of waiting on pins and needles at the edge of our seat, whatever, thing you want to throw out there. That's exactly where we are right now, and it's just so exciting that this is finally coming about. So we are going to talk about something Clone Wars related because of that, just to kind of celebrate. But before we dive into our topic this evening, make sure you're following us and subscribe to us everywhere. We are wherever you get your podcasts. But, 200 episodes, over 200 episodes. It's been a while since we've gotten some star ratings and reviews over on Apple Podcasts, and we'd really appreciate your help to spread the word about the show. And one of the best ways to help people find the show is to give us those star rating and reviews. So when people are searching for their podcasts, they find us. Two, another great way is to follow us and like us and interact with us on social media. Share the shows there, too. We've got The Jedi Masters, which is our show account there on Twitter, where you can talk to us about all the things Star Wars all day, all night. Well, John and I go to bed at night, but we'll come back to you in the morning, and we'll get back to you. You can find the show, the entire network. We've got at Join Nerd Party, so like us and follow us on both places there. And then we're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party, which is a great place to interact with us too, because, hey, we post the shows there, and, you can always comment. And then John and I, we like to comment back.
I have one question for you, just really quickly, because I know, we have a topic for tonight, but with something you said, we know that Jedi can call to each other through the Force. We know that Jedi can call to others even through the Force. And you mentioned sleeping and nighttime. Would a Jedi wake up for that? Or would they stay in a dream state? Could you like
a Jedi alarm clock?
Right. Yes, that's exactly where I'm going. Could Anakin is Anakin and Obi-Wan are on separate planets, and they're talking on the communicator, and Anakin's like, I gotta get up in 5 hours. Can you telepathically reach out to me or something like that?
Hey, I can totally see it happening. So
why not?
I like it.
It's canon now.
Yeah, I feel like I need a special app that's like a Jedi alarm clock, and you have Anakin's voice coming on and telling you this is where the fun begins.
I imagine that Anakin more often than not would have heard telepathically, "Oh, Anakin, you overslept again." And he just springs up.
That or just hello there.
Yes. Stop it, Obi-Wan. Stop it.
Oh, gosh. Send us an email, too. You can do that over at thenerdparty.com. There's the contact section. If you choose Aggressive Negotiations, then John and I get that email, and we can converse with you there. So, going all the way back, John, one of the things I always found really interesting was when you read about the beginning of the Clone Wars. The original idea was not that this was going to be a show about the main characters that we know. It wasn't going to be like Anakin and Obi-Wan and Padme and all those characters. And George throws a little bit of a curveball at Dave and is like, no, we're gonna have those characters, and so that brought into this interesting thought process into my mind as I've been thinking about the Clone Wars coming back, getting a chance to rewatch some of the Clone Wars recently as our friends are going through it, and they're in season 3 now at this point. And so there's a huge amount of time, a huge amount of episodes that we then get, specifically like our characters of Obi-Wan and Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about how much this show does for those characters by allowing us to spend that much time with them.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely, of course. And actually gives a lot of shading to different decisions and everything. Like, one of the great things about that shading that they give is it always served, and I think in a very satisfying way, not as and it would subvert expectations, and it would, play against some of the assumptions that you had made, but it never violated what you knew to be true about the characters. And I think so it walked a very fine line. But more to the point of, like, the fact that they came in and they, quote unquote, weren't supposed to initially. The clones have such a large role. I think that bringing in the main characters was a very excellent way to give us a shorthand to get to know those clones, but also to give us that emotional, that emotional point around which everything could revolve. Because if we're thrown into a situation, we're familiar with the Clone Wars, we're familiar with the Jedi, and if we had spent all of this time with the clones, we don't have the emotional hook. Whereas by bringing in Yoda and Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, of course, most beloved, one of the most beloved characters in all of Star Wars, you give us something to work with, and it gives the clones humanity, but it also played very strongly to the idea that the Jedi existed in a context. Like, I struggle to think of a show like this that could exist without the Jedi. And once you get to that threshold of there are going to be Jedi in it, because the Jedi are the generals, you would sit there and wonder, well, why the hell am I not seeing Anakin and Obi-Wan? Because I know that they're war heroes. I know that they're tremendously important figures in this historical event. So it makes complete sense to have them in there.
I really agree with that. And I think the thing that it does, and I've heard this from so many people, so I'm just going to start with Anakin instead of my favorite Obi-Wan, but I think, so many people responded to being able to spend a quality amount of time with Anakin Skywalker as a hero. Not a little kid, not kind of a whiny teenager, but really be a man and be a hero, one that you were kind of rooting for. Even though you know what's coming, you're still always rooting for this guy. And I think that's the thing. And part of that became the performance for Matt Lanter. Part of that is the writing for the character and all the things that they put him through. But for me, that became one of the most fun things about the show, was bringing this character to life in a way that made me understand even more, I guess, and I think we've probably said this before, but, the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker.
Oh, absolutely. See, the films, and even, I'll even bring in Tartakovsky's Clone Wars. The films and that original Clone Wars series, they operate like jazz and opera put together, right? I get the important notes. I can work with it. I can play with it. It responds, I respond to it on a very base emotional level, and that spurs on, the lessons and the intellectual part of it and everything like that. But there's not that small moment type of storytelling. And to your point, those small moments are, I think, what a lot of people were looking for when the prequels came around. And I think that's why there were so many people that rejoiced with the Clone Wars, was they got those small moments of seeing more of a human struggle instead of an outsized superhero struggle.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, one of the things that you're able to do that there with that is you really kind of put some flesh and blood on the marriage of Anakin Skywalker and Padme and the struggle that it is for these characters to be married. Like, you really get to see how difficult a position that they put themselves in, and in many ways the vice that they put their love in from the beginning that just kind of keeps ratcheting further and further up, which is an awful way to phrase it, but as I was thinking, as I'm saying it, it's like that's exactly what they've done.
No, you're spot on with that. And again, I think that gets back to the small human moments thing, where again it's operatic in the prequels, whereas with this you can see how a marriage that is, its foundation is not as secure as it should be, how the little tiny moments add more and more cracks to everything. But then to pinion back around, you can see as well how Anakin is much more at ease being the leader, being the soldier, than he is being the husband. And so I think there winds up being a very interesting sort of thing that winds up, and the clones add great relief to that, especially when you get side arcs about, you have the clone that goes off and becomes a farmer. You have clones who aren't happy about that. There's an arc where a clone aids the separatists because he's had enough. I'm a slave. You raised me to be a slave. This is ridiculous. And so I think you wind up seeing, because you have Anakin in there, you have the opportunity to see what a wartime situation does to a marriage, which is a very relevant thing for our society with, longstanding wars that went on and are going on now, and how that can cause relationship stress. And so by having Anakin in the series, we're able to do sort of a study of, in a sense, almost PTSD of an inability to leave the battlefield behind.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting parts of that is the way that, that plays out in his teaching style, obviously with Ahsoka. And, and what's interesting is then, of course, the counterbalance that we have then with the teaching style of Obi-Wan with her, and probably why she ends out somewhat sane as a character, because she's had both sides, and she almost seems kind of like the happy middle between the two. And so, but I think, that's one of those things where it, again, accentuates a lot of Anakin's flaws, but at the same time, by giving him Ahsoka, it also accentuates the fact that he has many good traits as well to pass on to somebody. It's mainly the issue of him not necessarily understanding when something is too far. He doesn't see that line. The line is a dot to him.
This is a really interesting point, because there's a really weird dynamic that can exist where when you're interacting with somebody else's child. Okay, let's just say for the sake of argument, Ahsoka is a child when we meet her and we see her grow up. And Ahsoka is Anakin's child for all intents and purposes. He's raising her. And Obi-Wan raised Anakin, in a sense. However, I would contest that what you see with Obi-Wan when he interacts with Ahsoka is much more relaxed than probably he was with Anakin. And so you see this counterpoint that I think is interesting in the, in the sense of parenting, that is, it's always easier to be cool with somebody else's kid than basically be a gentler teacher with somebody else's kid than with your own, because you're holding your own kid to sometimes impossibly high standards. And I can speak as a father. Every so often you have to go up and apologize and be like, look, I'm sorry. I know what you're capable of, and I'm trying to just get you there. Whereas an aunt or an uncle can come in and be like, "Oh, you're awesome. Hey, here you go. Let's, look at that. Look at how great that is. You're too hard on the kid." That sort of thing.
Well, and I mean, for Obi-Wan too, obviously, she's not the chosen one, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of pressure taking off of him. And I think in many ways, it kind of becomes also that parental thing of, when you have your second kid, unfortunately, you've kind of made a lot of mistakes with the first one that you won't make with the second one.
Oh, sure.
In many ways. And just to be honest, Ahsoka is a much better child than Anakin was. In the sense of the trouble that he gets into and his attitude.
Historical records from that era are spotty at best. So let's not rush to conclusions there, okay? I know that we're always in a rush to exonerate Obi-Wan from anything wrong. But until I get a show between Phantom Menace and Attack
I don't know. I feel like the Clone Wars give us an immense historical reference to mine here. So
I don't know. We'll table this one for another day. But it is interesting because, again, the Star Wars saga has always been about, especially the first 6, about parenting and the role of how parents relate to children, and children, teach parents, and parents teach children, and stuff like that. And so if you hadn't brought these characters in, we wouldn't have had that aspect of the Clone Wars either. And so it's all the more reason to have these characters in there. And on top of that, having them in that context, so you have Rex, you have Cody, you have Fives, you have these characters that can act as the everyman that looks at our heroes, these people that have always been larger than life, and look sideways in sort of that sense of, what are you guys doing? It provides that other relational aspect for them. And and as we're talking here, like you mentioned how Anakin is the chosen one and Obi-Wan's raising the chosen one. It's an even more interesting sort of thing, because I wonder then in the Clone Wars if the reason we see a more human and relatable Anakin is because this is a point in history where nobody's on his tail about being the chosen one the whole time. He's able to just go out and do things, and people aren't constantly saying, "Oh, you've got to bring balance to the Force." He's just out doing stuff, and that's what he wants to do. It's almost like an excuse for him not to have to think about those things.
Mm-hmm. Hey, look, it's Anakin, and he's doing stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Simpsons reference for you there, kids. A really old one at that.
Yep.
I think you really got a good point there when you think about the character of Anakin, and, in many ways, so many of the skills that he has are the things that are needed to win a war, which is, he's an incredible pilot. He's a great tactician. He's unconventional in his tactical abilities, which allows him many times to get the upper hand to, especially linear thinkers like droids, when he's going up against those tactical droids and stuff like that. So all of those, and he's just an incredible fighter in general. But it is interesting, and I love what you brought up about the character of how this makes him a warrior, but in the wrong way. The war helps craft him into somebody who becomes, in some ways, hardened to the things he shouldn't become hardened to, like death and destruction and all of that stuff. And it makes it easier for him, I think, to then be able to focus, of course, on what he wants personally and selfishly as a character. Because of all that he's experienced, the war kind of gives him the ability to almost make excuses for himself in that, and allow him to walk down those paths. And I mean, because even think about what happens at the beginning in Revenge of the Sith. He's like, "Oh man, I didn't think we'd ever be back, from the Outer Rim, and unless we had the Chancellor had been taken and all that kind of stuff." Like you just see a guy who has slowly kind of become a little more self-focused in all of this war, which can make sense. You got to find you're trying to find something to hold on to in all of this chaos. And whereas, I think, you juxtapose that with Obi-Wan, and we just talked about, the big arc with him in season 5, where the thing that he truly loves, one of those things is taken away from him. And yet what his reaction is to that is not a reaction,
Right.
Of equal or opposite force. It is to let it go, and then do the job that he has as a Jedi. And so it's just really interesting there to see that play out with Anakin, and it's just something that I think, again, the Clone Wars kind of helps reinforce the continual kind of slow walk towards darkness that he finds himself in by, obviously Episode 3.
Well, and there's also one of my favorite moments in Revenge of the Sith, and it's always been one of my favorite moments because it's such a quick and easy way to tell where Anakin is, that when they're flying in in the opening battle, and the clones are getting torn apart in the ARC 170s, and Anakin's first reaction is, I'm going back to help them. And Obi-Wan has to say, no, they're doing their job so we can do ours. Okay, just you got to let them go, right? So you have the whole let it go sort of thing. But the Clone Wars series, and especially by humanizing the clones, by giving the clones this, to bring it back to them, by giving us Rex, by giving us all of these clones that we've gotten to know over these years, we can understand it expands out that one moment. That one line gives us as an audience this sense of Anakin the hero being unable to let go. But then the Clone Wars taps into that moment and shows it's not just the fact that Anakin can't let go. It's not just the fact that he wants to control things. He has an actual real emotional tie. He sees these clones as men that he's served with. He wants to go back and help them for, yes, those reasons that sort of put him on the path toward Vader, but also because he's just sort of a decent guy.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting place for him to be. And I think this is another place where we've been talking about Anakin, but I think this is also when you have the other side. I think the prequels in general, I think, obviously opened up the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi in a way that, just kind of really format the character. But I also think that the Clone Wars, the same as with Anakin for Obi-Wan, do exactly the same thing in that they become this seminal work in helping us understand the ins and outs of who this character truly is. And I think part of that is because, we talked about last week, obviously, with the Satine thing being a huge part of this character. But I also think of arcs like when he goes undercover and, he's willing to, I would say, bend some rules, right? To try and get what they need to get at Dooku.
Right.
And this plot to assassinate the Chancellor. And what I thought was so interesting about that is that you see the way in which Anakin takes things personally that should not be taken personally in that place. And Obi-Wan understands the difference between him doing a job and the thing that job will sometimes require. And he has a trust in his friend that Anakin doesn't quite have. He feels betrayed instead of being able to look at it from the other perspective. Because, again, everything's kind of about Anakin. And for Obi-Wan, nothing's about Obi-Wan. Everything's about the greater good. And so there's a real differentiation there between those characters, especially in that arc. And I think for those two, it really helps show the vast differences that exist between them as characters.
Which, of course, gets back to the point that Obi-Wan should have been able to convey these sorts of lessons to Anakin, but, let's table that one again. But I think also just with Anakin and Obi-Wan, moving away from them, bringing in another character like a Mace Windu, but even more importantly, bringing in somebody like Yoda, especially with that first aired arc. Oh, well, not arc. That first aired episode of him on Toydaria. The very first episode after the movie was in theaters was him with those soldiers. And I think that it's, we can talk about Obi-Wan and Anakin plenty, but I think Yoda is given a real sense to shine in the show. And that speaks again to this overarching point that this show is decidedly different by not having those characters in there, because they are the characters that we cared about, that we learned to care about, and having them in there gives us a reason to care about the clones. And I think about the fact that the very first episode we get aired is Yoda. Basically, the point of the episode is to have a character that we respect, that a character we know to be wise, that a character that we always take at his word, basically conveying to us why we should care about the clones, what's important about them, and what we risk losing by the war. And I know that chronologically, if you watch in chronological order, it's not the first episode to watch. But I think it's very important that that was the first one that aired, because I think it sets the tone for these characters are all going to inform us about the other. And so, again, going back to Tartakovsky's, Clone Wars, that was all just about getting us very well, by the way. I loved Tartakovsky's Clone Wars, but it was very much, again, on that big operatic thing. Whereas if you just look at that one Yoda episode, you see right there how small and human moments are going to be the concern of this show, for the entire duration.
I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate, again, just of the fact that we get to spend more time with the characters we know, because I also appreciate the ability to spend time then, too, with the way the show works with other Jedi. Plo Koon, Aayla Secura, Mace Windu, all of these characters, even, little Coyote Mundi every once in a while. It's really nice to be able to play around with these characters that we don't really get to spend a lot of time with anywhere else. And here, we get to do that, which is really neat. The fact that what it does, I think, to me, the whole show really does a great job of making those scenes then in the Revenge of the Sith so much sadder when we lose those characters.
Oh, for sure.
When they're dying. And so, again, I just think it's one of the ways in which we take the idea of a prequel and we use it to enhance everything that comes afterwards. But I think the great thing about the Clone Wars is it just kind of enhances everything around it.
Right.
And specifically because these characters then are so much richer and deeper than they were when we first met them, which is really cool.
Right, exactly. And especially with Anakin and Obi-Wan and everything, we get the sense in Revenge of the Sith, when Order 66 comes down, it's no longer just, oh, well, of course the clones did it. They were bred to do that. It's, these guys were friends. All of these people were friends. They knew each other by name. They hung out together. They cared about each other. And it makes that betrayal so much more impactful. Here's a question for you. If you were to recommend to somebody their viewing order, everybody always debates, oh, well, the movie viewing order, would you consider it mandatory for somebody to watch Episode 2 and then watch all of the Clone Wars and then Episode 3? Or would you say Episode 2, Episode 3, and then you can go back and watch the Clone Wars?
If you had that kind of time with somebody, I would say it's worth it. I really do. I think, if you really do have that kind of time. If you don't, though, I think one of the best things is that if somebody really enjoys the characters and in that era and they want more of them, you have a ready-made option for them. You get to say, man, if you love these characters and you really want to get to spend, copious amounts of time with them and really get to know them in a way that just kind of blows your mind, this is the show for you. And I think that's the thing that I guess I would come to at that point. So,
see, for me, I would want to look at something that would have like an essential episodes list, like a vital list of episodes to watch. Not necessarily all of the seasons, but these are the episodes that are necessary to watch. But I think even if you're talking about showing the movies, I think that the Clone Wars becomes incredibly essential if you're going to have somebody watch Solo: A Star Wars Story. So that although, here's the question. Would you show somebody the Clone Wars so that the Maul appearance in Solo: A Star Wars Story is no longer such a surprise? Although it still kind of was. Or would you know what I'm saying? Like that one moment, like the Clone Wars even makes that moment even more, like, does it make it more impactful? Or should you say, have somebody see Solo: A Star Wars Story and say, Maul's alive? And you'd be like, boy, have I got the arcs for you.
Well, I think that as long as they don't know the surprise, Maul is always going to be a surprise. I mean, he obviously was to us. We had no idea. And, so he blew our minds.
The best.
I think, I feel that the Clone Wars is essential Star Wars watching. Where you show that to somebody, it doesn't matter to me. But I do think it's one of those things that if somebody truly loves Star Wars, that this creates in them, just to give an example. So we have some great friends. They literally live across the street from my wife and I. We go to church together and everything, and they're Star Wars fans, but they hadn't watched the Clone Wars yet. And so we recommended it to them. We watched the movie with them. We watched some of the episodes with them, and so they kind of got into it. And every time we talk, they're talking about the episodes and, like, getting into it and really kind of falling in love with these characters more and more, and they're really loving it. And I think that's the thing that I've seen almost every time that I've tried to get somebody into the show, is that once they get into it, they can't stop. It's a little bit like Pringles. Once you pop, you can't stop. And so I truly believe that, if anybody will give the Clone Wars a chance, they're going to fall in love with it. And part of that is just because not only do you get to spend more time with the war and really see the way in which this all plays out, but you get to see a whole new side of these characters that brings them to life in a way. And the characters you love, like Obi-Wan, Anakin, Yoda, Padme, like the clones and everything. And so it just makes everything richer and deeper, and that's the beauty, I think, of the show. And so in the end, like, I don't really care where people watch it, but I do think it's like, guys, if you love Star Wars, I don't think we can say anymore that the Clone Wars and Rebels are just like shows, you can watch them or whatever. I think that they need to be watched. So,
and the most fascinating thing about that is that we have a different sci-fi property that shall go nameless. But what's so fascinating is that these television shows, which have been largely overlooked by a lot of people, have become such essential viewing for Star Wars. And Star Wars is still not viewed as a televised medium. But there's almost an argument that the Clone Wars and Rebels as well, and now The Mandalorian, are an argument that Star Wars storytelling really should be, people should not view Star Wars just as a big screen, blockbuster, billion-dollar movie event, but as this long form storytelling that benefits all of these characters so much. Like, I know that's sort of like a hodgepodge way to say it, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, if you say Star Wars to John Q. Public, he's like, oh, those are a bunch of movies. It's like, it's really these too. You really need to pay attention to these shows.
Well, and I think that's the thing that it's been really cool that, because the success of The Mandalorian, and because the Clone Wars are returning, I feel like there's much more press in that now, which is great, which is really great, and I think, honestly, one of the things that really helped keep Star Wars alive, obviously, when, we were not getting new episodes and stuff, it was the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars were the thing that were keeping the spirit of Star Wars alive, and people were falling in love with it, and then it went off, and still people were getting back into it on Netflix and everything. So I think that this is a thing that's just really cool about this series, and it all comes down to, I think George made the right decision, right? You needed to have, I think, these characters to help make this show the most accessible it could be, and then you could go and do a show like, Rebels, where you don't really have any of your main characters for the most part, but you're already invested in this medium for Star Wars.
But more than anything, Clone Wars, I will always contend, represents that forward-looking aspect of Star Wars that we've always enjoyed, which is, if you really look at it, if you look at the storytelling style, everything, it saw the streaming revolution coming. And if I struggle to think of another show that lends itself more or better to that environment. I think that everybody else is catching up to it at this point. And the fact that it first aired on basic cable, like the beautiful thing of it is it now exists in the format that I think it was always meant for, which was binge it 3 or 4 episodes at a time, or a season. Like, there's this concept behind the Clone Wars that it seems so far ahead of its time when you really think about the time at which it first aired, and now it's here in this time, and it's prepackaged, it's ready made. It's almost like you couldn't ask for a better thing to have available when you launch your streaming service than this show.
The only thing that Disney Plus needs, and I know they're listening, so Disney Plus,
yes,
you need a chronological watch button for the Clone Wars, as well as the regular watch, because that way you can do either one. Because I think as you were talking, I was thinking how fun it is, because you can do it the way you originally watched it, or you can go through it that way. And knowing that George wanted to finally have this packaged in a chronological order one day, in a big massive set, it would be really cool for them to be able to create the programming there on the app, so you could just hit that button and then you could watch through that way too. Especially too, like you were talking about, like, do you show somebody the Clone Wars, and that gives you the opportunity to be like, well, we're just picking right back up after we left episode 2, so.
Or even have an option where when you go to an episode, it tells you, like which episode's in the arc and like almost like a timeline feature where it's like, oh, you know what, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to watch this, and it would say, by the way, this ties into this, this, and this, so if you want to watch those arcs next, you can do that. We're forward thinkers.
Yeah.
We're ahead of the game here. I think the basic point of this discussion is Disney Plus needs to hire us.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll help you create your new Star Wars content as well, just as a bonus.
Oh, from your lips to God's ears. Or the mouse's in this case.
I was going to say Bob Iger. I mean, I know he's listening. So.
Yes.
Thank you, Uncle Bob. Well, John, so much to talk about, obviously, with the Clone Wars being back. We're going to be celebrating that for a long time now. But, if anybody wants to catch up with you online, as maybe they're listening to back episodes of the show, checking out all of our Clone Wars episodes, where can they find you?
Well, gosh, you can find me as Kessel Junkie online, KESSELJUNKIE. More active than I'd like to be on Twitter. I'm on Letterboxd giving reviews all the time, and I'm actually active on Instagram as well, doing a couple of things behind the scenes. Of course, there are back catalogs of different shows that I've been on. I'm working on a couple of things behind the scenes right now, but Kessel Junkie is the way to reach out to me. But Matt, where are the places that people can find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero under the name MattRushing02. I'm here on the network. I do another show. It's called Owl Post with Dre Kaufman. We are walking through Harry Potter one chapter at a time. We are in the middle of the Half-Blood Prince, so it is a lot of fun. You can also find me over on the Trek FM network. I'm doing 2 shows. I talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine with Chris Jones when we get a chance over on a show called The Orb. You can also find me doing the 602 Club, which is talking about all of the fandoms that we love, not just one. It's a blast every week to be able to do that with my friend Christy and then other guests that stop by, like John. And then I'm doing a show called Cinema Stories with my good friend Courtney, and we talk about films through the lens of faith. But John, I hear the chimes for the dinner bell there at the Jedi Temple, so I think it's time to close negotiations and get back.
Bantha Steaks! Matt, it's time to close negotiations.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.